The spaceport was loud, filled with voices, metal steps, and the deep hum of ships landing and leaving. In the middle of the crowd, a small alien girl stood frozen, her body trembling, her eyes wide with fear. She was too young to be alone, yet no one stood beside her. No one held her hand. Her silver skin shone under the station lights, and strange blue marks glowed faintly across her arms. People passed her by, whispering and staring, but no one dared to get close. Some pointed at her, some muttered cruel words, some even laughed at her weakness. The girl's breathing grew faster, her chest tight, like she could not get enough air. Her hands clutched at her chest, and tears welled in her glowing eyes. She dropped to her knees, panic rising inside her, the world spinning around her. She whispered something in her alien tongue, begging for anyone to help, but the crowd kept moving, their faces cold, their hearts distant to them. She was not just a child, she was different, a reminder of a royal bloodline that none dared to anger, and so they looked away, pretending not to see, afraid to be involved in that moment. One figure noticed what others ignored. A human man dressed in simple clothes, carrying a small bag slung over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw her fall to the ground, his eyes narrowing with concern. He looked around, waiting for someone to help, but no one moved. The girl's breathing grew worse, her hands trembling, her voice breaking into sobs. The man stepped closer slowly, careful not to scare her more. He crouched down in front of her, lowering himself to her level. His voice was gentle, calm, filled with warmth. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe," he said softly, though he doubted she even understood his words. The girl's eyes darted to him, confusion mixing with fear. He could see her lips trembling, her body shaking, and then, without a second thought, he reached into his bag. He pulled out something small, something ordinary, something no one expected, a plastic bubble wand and a small bottle of soap liquid. He dipped the wand into the liquid, lifted it, and blew. A soft stream of shimmering bubbles floated into the air. Glowing under the station lights, the girl blinked, her sobs slowing for just a moment. The bubbles sparkled with rainbow colors, drifting slowly around her face. She reached out one trembling hand, touching one, and it popped gently on her finger. Her frightened eyes softened with wonder. Another bubble floated past her, then another, then a dozen more. Her cries faded into silence as her gaze followed the dancing orbs. The man smiled, blowing again, letting the bubbles rise higher, swirl and drift down like tiny stars. The crowd stopped for a moment, surprised at the strange sight. A human comforting an alien child with nothing but bubbles. Some shook their heads, muttering, others whispered, but none stepped forward. The girl's tears still lingered, but now they were mixed with a look of fragile hope. She whispered softly, her voice small, almost broken. "What is this?" she asked in her alien accent, her words clumsy but clear. The man chuckled lightly, nodding as he blew more bubbles. "Bubbles," he said, pointing to them with a gentle smile. She repeated the word slowly. "Bub. Blease," her voice shaking but steadier than before. She reached out, trying to catch another, her fear slowly melting away. The man watched her closely, making sure she was calmer. "See? Nothing scary. Just bubbles," he said softly. For the first time since she had entered the spaceport, the girl smiled faintly. It was small, weak, but it was real. She clung to that tiny piece of comfort, like it was the only thing keeping her from drowning in fear. And high above, unseen by both the man and the girl, someone else was watching. From a darkened chamber overlooking the port, sharp golden eyes studied the scene. A figure cloaked in regal garments, tall and commanding, stood hidden in the shadows. It was the Queen, ruler of an alien empire, mother of the girl now chasing bubbles in trembling hands. Her expression was unreadable, her gaze sharp, yet in her chest something stirred, for she had seen countless people bow before her, beg for mercy or fear her wrath, but never had she seen a human kneel to her daughter with nothing but kindness. And never had she seen her daughter smile so openly in such a simple moment. The Queen's guard stood beside her, waiting for orders, ready to storm down and protect the child, but the Queen raised one hand, stopping them. "Not yet," she whispered coldly, though her eyes never left the human. "Let us see what he does next," and so the moment continued. Fragile as glass, delicate as the bubbles floating in the air. The girl was still in crisis, still trembling, still weak, but for the first time she was not alone. For a human stranger had stepped forward, not knowing who she was, not knowing her bloodline. He only saw a child in need, and he chose to stay. From the high chamber above the spaceport, the Queen stood silently, her long cloak brushing against the polished floor. Her golden eyes locked on the fragile scene below, where her young daughter was still surrounded by shimmering bubbles. The girl's trembling had slowed, her wide, fearful eyes now watching the floating colors. Clinging to the simple magic, the queen's heart clenched, though her face remained cold, unreadable to her guards who stood like statues at her side. No one in the crowd below knew who the child was. No one dared whisper the truth. The little girl was no ordinary alien child. She was a princess, the heir to the throne of a vast empire. Her identity was hidden to protect her, yet her panic had betrayed her weakness in front of strangers. And of all people in the galaxy, it was a lone human who stepped forward. Not in fear, not in calculation, but in kindness. The queen narrowed her eyes, watching the man kneeling before her daughter. He was not dressed as a warrior, not armored, not important, just a common traveler with tired boots and plain clothes. Yet he had done what none of the crowd dared to do. He had calmed her child with nothing but patience. With nothing but bubbles, her guards shifted uneasily, one stepping forward to speak. "My queen, shall we intervene? The human touches the princess without permission," he whispered firmly. But the queen raised her hand, silencing him. Her gaze never left the pair below. Her voice low and sharp. "Not yet," she said, her tone making the guard step back immediately. The queen wanted to see more. She wanted to know if this human acted only out of pity, or if there was something deeper, for she had seen many creatures bow to her throne. They offered gifts, treasures, empty words, always seeking something in return. But here stood a man who did not know he was being tested. He had no idea the frightened girl was royalty, no idea her mother's eyes were upon him. That ignorance made his actions pure. The queen's breath slowed as she watched the girl reach for another bubble, her small hands closing, her lips curving into the faintest smile. It had been too long since the queen saw her daughter smile so freely. The palace walls were cold, filled with lessons of duty, rules, and endless expectations. Her daughter had been trained to hide her fear, to walk tall, to bear the weight of a crown not yet on her head. But she was still only a child, and here, in the arms of a stranger, she looked like one. The queen turned slightly, her voice steady but tinged with something her guards could not name. "Do you see this?" she asked the advisor beside her. The old alien bowed his head, his silver horns low. "Yes, my queen. The human shows unusual behavior," he admitted carefully. "Unusual?" the queen repeated, her golden eyes flashing. "It is rare," the advisor continued softly, "for a human to act without demand, without bargaining. He shields her as if she were his own." The queen's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something thoughtful, dangerous. She leaned closer to the glass wall of the chamber, her hand resting against the cold surface. The man below offered the girl a small bottle of water from his bag, tilting it gently so she could drink. The child drank slowly, her breathing calming further, her tears drying. The crowd around them kept whispering, too afraid to come closer, too curious to look away. And still the human stayed calm, his body shielding her from the cruel stares. The queen's guard shifted again, his hand gripping the hilt of his weapon. "My queen, this is dangerous," he pressed carefully. "The princess should not be touched by outsiders. If her weakness is revealed—" The queen cut him off with a single glance, sharp enough to make him silent. "If her weakness is revealed," she whispered, "then it is not because of him. It is because of us. Because we left her alone." The chamber fell silent at her words, the weight of them pressing heavy. The queen rarely admitted such truths, yet watching the human stirred something unusual in her. She remembered her own childhood, her own isolation, when no one dared to comfort her tears. Strength was demanded, fear was punished, and affection was forbidden. Perhaps that was why this moment burned so deeply into her. Her daughter, the princess, had found comfort not in soldiers, not in courtiers, but in a stranger from Earth. The queen straightened her back, her voice turning colder again. "But this changes nothing," she said firmly. "We do not trust humans. One act of kindness does not erase centuries of their chaos." The advisor bowed, though his eyes flickered with doubt. The queen's golden gaze returned to the scene below, narrowing again, and yet, despite her words, she could not look away. The girl now sat on the floor, calmer, clutching the bubble wand the human had given her. She blew clumsy bubbles of her own, giggling softly when one floated high before popping. The man laughed lightly, nodding encouragement, his presence steady. The queen's chest tightened again, though her face showed nothing. Her guards could not hear the quiet thought in her mind. He does not even know she is mine, she whispered to herself. He protects her with no reason, no reward. Why? For the first time in years, the queen felt something strange. A flicker of curiosity mixed with respect. She did not yet know if it was dangerous or valuable. But she knew one thing. This human was no ordinary traveler. And though he did not know it, he had already stepped into the game of empires. The queen leaned back, her cloak trailing behind her. Her voice cold as ever when she spoke again. Watch him closely, she ordered her guards. Do not interfere. Not yet, let him show us who he truly is. Below, the bubbles continued to float, delicate and shining, and the queen's gaze never left the human who had dared to care. The girl's small hands clutched the bubble wand tightly, her silver fingers trembling as if she feared it might vanish. Her breaths were steadier now, no longer breaking in painful gasps, but her eyes still carried traces of fear. The human knelt in front of her, speaking softly, his words simple, gentle, carrying no demand. You're safe now. Don't worry, he whispered, though he wasn't sure she could understand him, but kindness needed no translation. The girl looked up at him, her wide eyes glowing faintly with tears and curiosity. No one had ever spoken to her like this outside the palace walls. No one except her mother in rare moments of softness. The crowd around them stayed distant, whispering, judging. Too afraid to be near the strange child, yet the human remained, as if the crowd didn't exist, as if only she mattered. He reached into his bag again and pulled out a small piece of bread wrapped in paper. The girl's eyes widened at the sight of food, her lips parting slightly, her body leaning forward, but she hesitated, her hands pulling back as if afraid it was a trick. The human noticed and smiled softly, breaking the bread into two. He took one small bite himself first, chewing slowly, showing her it was safe. Then he offered the other half to her, his hands steady, his eyes kind. The girl's stomach growled softly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Finally, she reached out and took the bread. Her fingers brushing against his rough, calloused hand, she nibbled at it carefully, tasting it like it was the most precious gift she had ever received. The human chuckled lightly, his voice warm. See? Nothing scary. Just food, he said, nodding gently. The girl's lips curved into the faintest smile, still weak but no longer broken. Above, hidden in shadows, the queen watched closely, her golden eyes narrowing. She had given her daughter every luxury, yet she had never seen her eat with such relief. Her guards shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to speak after her command. The human then reached into his bag again and pulled out a small cloth. He dipped it into the water bottle and carefully offered it to the girl. Here, wipe your face, he said, his tone like an older brother speaking to a sibling. The girl stared at him for a moment, then took the cloth with shaky hands. She wiped her tears and the dust on her cheeks, her small frame sitting taller than before. The human nodded approvingly, his smile quiet but genuine. There you go. Better, he whispered for the first time. She giggled softly, the sound light, fragile but real. The queen's lips parted slightly at the sound, a memory flashing in her mind. Her daughter's laughter as a baby. Before the weight of duty silenced it, the queen clenched her jaw, forcing her face back into its cold mask, but inside her heart ached. The girl leaned closer to the human now, her trust growing with each passing second. She whispered softly, her accent thick, her words broken but clear enough. Why, help me, she asked, her glowing eyes searching his face. The human tilted his head, his brows furrowing slightly. Because you needed it, he said simply, shrugging as if it was the most natural thing in the world. No one should cry alone, he added quietly. The girl blinked at his words, her chest tightening in a way she didn't understand. In the palace, she was told she must always be strong. That weakness was dangerous, that tears had no place for royalty. But here, in the arms of a stranger, she was allowed to cry and still be safe. Her hands tightened on the bubble wand, her eyes shining with new light. The human noticed a group of aliens at the edge of the crowd staring and whispering. He shifted his body slightly, placing himself between them and the girl, shielding her without even thinking about it. His shoulders were broad, his stance protective, as if he had done this many times before. The girl looked at his back, feeling a strange sense of safety she had never known in public. Above, the queen saw it too, her heart torn between pride and unease. This human acted as if the princess was his own blood, yet he had no idea who she truly was. Strange, the queen whispered under her breath. He shields her as if it cost him nothing. Her advisor bowed slightly. Humans are unpredictable, my queen. That is both their danger and their strength. The queen's eyes narrowed at his words, her mind already calculating what this encounter might mean. But the human knew nothing of politics, nothing of thrones or crowns. He only knew that a child was afraid, and he would not walk away. The girl finished the bread, licking her fingers shyly. She looked up at him and whispered softly, "Thank you," her alien accent heavy but sincere. The human smiled and nodded, his heart warming at the simple gratitude. "No need," he said. "You're safe now." For a long moment, the spaceport noise faded around them, as if only they existed in that small bubble of kindness. The girl leaned closer, her trust complete. Her fear gone, and high above, the queen clenched her fists, her golden eyes burning. For the first time in years, her daughter looked truly happy, and it was not because of her crown, her guards, or her empire. It was because of a human who had nothing to give except his kindness. The queen's voice was sharp when she finally spoke to her guards. "Do not touch him. Do not reveal her identity." "Let him continue," she ordered. Her words echoed in the chamber, her tone cold but her heart unsettled, for deep inside, she knew this moment would change everything. The girl had found comfort in the most unlikely of places, and the queen could not stop watching. The spaceport noise shifted, whispers turning sharper, crueler. From the edge of the crowd, 3 tall alien youths stepped forward, their faces twisted with arrogance. They wore dark clothes marked with clan symbols, the kind of symbols that carried fear on every street. The leader, a broad-shouldered alien with gray scales, smirked as he pointed at the trembling girl. "Look at her," he sneered, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. Crying like a weakling, his companions laughed, their voices harsh, echoing across the metal floor. The girl shrank back, her silver skin paling, her hands clutching the bubble wand tightly. Her earlier calm shattered, replaced again with trembling fear. The human stepped closer, his body shielding her, his eyes narrowing at the approaching bullies. The leader tilted his head, noticing the human, his grin widening. "And what's this?" he mocked. "A human babysitter? Do you think you can protect her?" The crowd stirred uneasily, some stepping back, not wanting to be caught in the confrontation. The girl whimpered softly, pressing herself closer to the human's side. He glanced down at her, then back up at the 3 aliens, his jaw tightening. He didn't carry weapons. He wasn't a soldier, but his stance was steady, unshaken. "Leave her alone," he said firmly, his voice calm but sharp. The leader laughed, his companions joining in, their mocking tone dripping with cruelty. "Or what? You'll blow bubbles at us?" The leader sneered, his eyes glowing faintly with menace. The human raised the bubble wand slowly, dipping it back into the soapy liquid. He lifted it to his lips and blew, releasing a stream of shimmering bubbles right into their faces. The crowd gasped, half in shock, half in amusement. The bubbles floated around the bullies, popping softly against their scaly skin. For a moment, the leader froze, caught off guard by the sheer absurdity. The human smirked lightly, his voice steady. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe I will." The crowd erupted in murmurs, some laughing quietly, others whispering in disbelief. The girl stared at him with wide eyes, her fear mixing with awe. He wasn't strong, he wasn't armed, but he was unafraid. The leader growled, his pride stung by the human's defiance. "You dare mock me?" he snarled, stepping forward, his clawed hand twitching. His companions moved closer too, their shadows falling over the pair. The human didn't flinch, didn't step back. Instead, he shifted slightly, keeping the girl hidden behind him. "Walk away," he said firmly, his voice calm but commanding. Above, in the high chamber, the queen's eyes sharpened, her golden gaze never leaving the scene. Her guard stirred, one whispering urgently, "My queen, they will harm her. Let us intervene." But the queen raised her hand once more, her voice like ice. "No, not yet. I want to see." The bullies circled, their mocking laughter echoing. The leader leaned closer, his breath hot, his voice low and threatening. "She's nothing, human. Just trash. Step aside before we teach you your place." The human's eyes hardened, his jaw tightening. "She's not nothing," he said softly, his words cutting like steel. "She's a child, and I won't step aside." The crowd fell silent at his words, the courage in his voice echoing across the port. The girl's heart pounded, her small fingers clutching his sleeve. She had never seen anyone speak for her so openly, so bravely. The bullies hissed, anger flashing across their faces. The leader raised his hand, ready to strike. The girl gasped, shutting her eyes, bracing for pain. But before the hand could fall, the human stepped forward, his movement sharp and surprising. He raised the bubble wand again and blew directly into the leader's face. Soap and air burst into dozens of tiny bubbles. Sticking to his eyes and mouth, the leader stumbled back with a growl, swiping angrily at the floating orbs. The crowd erupted into laughter this time. Unable to hold it in, the bully's pride cracked, their anger boiling hotter. The leader roared, his claws extending. But before he could strike again, a loud voice rang through the crowd. "Enough!" It wasn't the queen, not yet. It was an old merchant who had been watching from the side. He stepped forward, his voice trembling with fear but filled with respect for the human's courage. "Shame on you, threatening a child while a human protects her better than any of you." Others in the crowd murmured agreement. Emboldened by his words, the bullies froze. Realizing the eyes of the entire port were now against them, the leader snarled, glaring at the human one last time. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. He turned sharply, his companions following. Vanishing back into the crowd, the tension eased, though whispers still filled the air. The human exhaled slowly, glancing down at the girl. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice gentle again. The girl nodded shakily, her eyes shining with gratitude. Above in the chamber, the queen's golden eyes burned with silent fury. She had wanted to see the human's true nature, and now she had. He had no weapons, no power, no knowledge of who her daughter was. Yet he had stood against cruelty, mocked danger with bubbles, and shielded the princess without hesitation. The queen's voice was low when she finally spoke, her words cold but heavy with meaning. "He defends her as if he were born to it," she whispered. Her guards bowed in silence, unsure what their queen would decide next. But deep in her chest, beneath layers of pride and duty, the queen felt something rare. A spark of respect, unwanted but undeniable. The human had passed another test without even knowing one existed. The crowd was still buzzing after the bullies left, whispers echoing like waves through the spaceport. Everyone's eyes were locked on the strange pair, the fragile alien girl clutching a bubble wand, and the human kneeling protectively beside her. He leaned down, his voice soft, steady. "You're okay now," he whispered to her. "They won't hurt you." The girl nodded, her eyes wet with fresh tears, though these were not tears of fear anymore. They were tears of relief. She clung to his arm, her tiny fingers gripping tightly, as if letting go meant the fear would return. The human smiled faintly. Brushing dust from her shoulders, he spoke gently. "The way one would to a little sister. No one should have to face that alone," he said softly. The girl blinked at him, her lips parting, her voice trembling. "My mother," she whispered. "She—" "Well, thank you." The human chuckled at her words, shaking his head lightly. "Sure," he said with a grin, thinking it was just a child's way of speaking. Maybe she meant some caretaker, some relative waiting nearby. He had no idea what those words truly meant. The girl's glowing eyes softened, her small voice struggling to form the words she wanted. "She is Queen," she whispered again, almost too quiet for him to hear. But before he could respond, the atmosphere in the port changed. The hum of voices died suddenly. Replaced by silence, the crowd shifted, parting like water as shadows stretched across the polished floor. Dozens of armored guards appeared, their steps heavy, their presence sharp and threatening, every head bowed, every voice hushed. As the spaceport lights dimmed slightly, the girl clutched the human's arm tighter, whispering faintly, "She comes." The human frowned, confused. And then he saw her. From the far end of the port, a tall figure emerged, cloaked in flowing royal garments, her golden eyes glowing like fire under the lights. Her presence was overwhelming, heavy, the kind that demanded silence without a word. Every alien in the crowd dropped to their knees instantly, heads pressed low. Only the human stayed standing, frozen in shock. He realized too late what was happening. The woman walking forward was no caretaker, no noble, but the queen herself, the ruler of the empire. And the trembling child by his side was not just a frightened girl. She was the princess, heir to the throne. The girl looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with a strange mix of relief and fear. "You see?" she whispered softly, her voice shaking. "I told you, my mother." The human's chest tightened as reality struck him like a storm. His knees almost gave way, his breath catching in his throat. The queen stopped only a few steps away, her towering figure radiating cold authority. Her golden gaze locked onto him, sharp and unreadable. The guards surrounded them instantly, their weapons gleaming. But none moved without her command. The human swallowed hard, lowering his eyes instinctively, unsure of what to do. His hand trembled slightly as he tried to step back, but the princess clung tighter to him. Refusing to let go, her small voice broke the silence. "Fragile but determined, mother. He helped me," she whispered, her words carrying across the chamber. The queen's eyes flickered for just a moment, but her expression remained cold. She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming, her shadow falling over both of them. The human bowed awkwardly, his voice unsteady. I didn't know who she was," he stammered quickly. "I only saw a child in trouble." The queen's lips parted, her voice calm yet heavy with power. "And why did you help her?" she asked sharply, her tone cutting through the silence. The human lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers with quiet honesty. "Because no one else would," he said softly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. No one should cry alone. The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd held its breath, the guards tense, waiting for her response. The queen studied him for a long, unbearable moment, her golden eyes piercing into his soul. She expected fear, excuses, maybe even begging, but instead, she found truth. Simple, unpolished truth. The princess tugged at her mother's cloak, her voice pleading, "Please, mother." "He is kind," she whispered, her eyes glowing with hope. The queen's face softened just slightly, a flicker of emotion breaking her mask before returning to ice. She turned slowly, her cloak sweeping across the floor as she addressed the entire crowd. "Remember this day," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. This human who had no reason, no knowledge, no reward, shielded a princess when no one else dared. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers spreading like fire. A human had been praised openly, publicly by the queen herself. The guards bowed low, the advisor's eyes wide with disbelief. The human stood frozen, unsure if this was praise or a warning. But the princess clung to him still, smiling faintly through her tears. The queen's voice lowered, cold again as she addressed him directly. "You have placed yourself in my sight, human," she said, her tone unreadable. "From this moment forward, your life is no longer your own." The human's chest tightened, unsure what fate those words carried. But as he looked down at the princess smiling weakly up at him, he knew one thing for certain. His life had already changed forever, and so had the Empire's. The spaceport was silent, every voice crushed under the weight of the queen's presence. Her golden eyes did not blink, her gaze locked on the lone human who still stood in front of her daughter. The guards waited, their weapons gleaming, ready to strike if their queen gave even the smallest signal. The human's heart pounded like thunder in his chest, but he did not move away. The princess's small hands clung to his sleeve, as if letting go meant she would be left defenseless again. The queen's voice finally broke the silence, low, sharp, and cold. "You touched her, you shielded her, you spoke for her." When all others bowed in fear, she said slowly. Her words echoed across the chamber, heavy and dangerous. The human swallowed hard, his mouth dry, but he lifted his head enough to meet her gaze. "I only saw a child in pain," he said softly, "and I could not ignore her." The queen's expression didn't change, but inside her chest something stirred, a faint echo of forgotten warmth. She remembered her own childhood, standing alone in vast halls, crying silently with no one to comfort her. Her people had told her, "A queen does not cry, a queen does not need comfort." Yet here stood a human who dared to give her daughter the very thing she was once denied. The guard shifted again, tense and uncertain. "My queen," one whispered, bowing deeply, "allow us to seize him. He must be punished for this breach." The queen raised her hand sharply, silencing him with a single gesture. Her golden eyes never left the human's face. "Why?" she asked suddenly, her voice cutting like a blade. "Why risk yourself for her when you thought she was no one?" The question pierced the air like lightning, and the crowd leaned closer, waiting for his answer. The human breathed deeply, his voice steady though his body trembled inside. "Because no one else would," he replied simply. The princess's grip on his arm tightened, her glowing eyes shimmering with silent hope. The queen's gaze darkened, though not with anger, but with something else, conflict. Her entire reign had been built on strength, on showing no weakness, on demanding loyalty. But this man, this ordinary human, had done what none of her courtiers, none of her soldiers had dared. He had shown kindness without knowing the cost. The queen turned her back slightly, her cloak flowing across the polished floor as she spoke to her advisors. "What do you see?" she asked sharply. The old advisor bowed, his voice cautious. "I see a man with no weapon, no power, Yet he stands unshaken before a throne. That is rare, my queen, the guards murmured, some in agreement, others in anger. To allow a human this much honor is dangerous, one hissed. They are unpredictable. But the princess's small voice rose suddenly, trembling but brave. Mother. Please, she whispered, her eyes glistening. He is good. The crowd gasped softly, for it was rare to hear the princess speak so openly in public. The queen turned slowly, her golden eyes narrowing at her daughter. For a moment her mask cracked, the steel of her gaze softening. She had not expected her daughter to defend anyone, let alone a stranger. The queen stepped closer again, her shadow falling across both of them. Her voice was quiet now, but every word was heavy with judgment. You stand here, human, unarmed, outnumbered, and uninvited, she said, her tone low and sharp. And yet you did not kneel, you did not run. You did not betray her when it would have been easy. The human's throat tightened. But he nodded faintly, his voice calm. I don't need to know who she is to know she matters, he said softly. She matters because she is a child. That is enough. The queen's heart jolted at his words, though her face remained unreadable. She had heard countless speeches in her life, polished words from diplomats, honeyed lies from enemies, but never something so simple. So raw, the crowd shifted, whispers rising again. Some were shocked, some even dared to admire the human's courage. The queen raised her hand, silencing them all. Her golden eyes swept across the chamber before returning to him. At last she spoke her judgment, her voice firm and final. This human will not be punished, she declared, her words echoing like thunder. He will not be harmed. He will not be silenced. Gasps erupted across the chamber, some in shock, some in anger. The guards lowered their weapons reluctantly, their faces tight with confusion. The princess let out a breath she had been holding, her grip on the human's sleeve loosening but not releasing. The queen stepped even closer now, standing so near he could see the faint glow of her golden eyes. But know this, she said sharply, her voice dropping lower, meant only for him. You have stepped into the eyes of the throne. From this day forward, you cannot go back to being no one. The human's chest tightened, his breath shallow. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted it. But he understood, by helping a stranger, by shielding a child, he had changed the course of his life. The queen turned sharply, her cloak sweeping behind her like a storm. Bring him to the palace, she commanded her guards. Her voice firm, he has earned an audience, and a place under my watch. The crowd bowed low again, whispers spreading like fire. The human stood frozen, his mind spinning, his heart pounding. The princess looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with quiet relief. She whispered softly, only for him to hear, You are not alone now. And though he did not know what awaited him beyond the palace gates, he knew one thing for certain: his kindness had reached the heart of a queen. The palace gates opened wide, golden light spilling across the polished stone floor. The human walked slowly, still in shock, his heart pounding as guards surrounded him. Beside him, the princess held tightly to his sleeve, refusing to let go, her glowing eyes calm now but determined. The great hall stretched endlessly, filled with towering statues, glowing banners, and silent courtiers bowing low. Every step echoed like thunder, reminding him that he was far from the noisy spaceport where this began. At the end of the hall, the queen sat on her throne, her golden eyes sharp, her presence heavy. The human swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he stood tall. Refusing to tremble, the princess stepped forward, standing before her mother with her head bowed slightly. Mother, she whispered. Please, he is kind. He saved me. The hall was silent, every ear straining to hear the queen's reply. The queen studied her daughter for a long moment, then turned her golden gaze to the human. You calmed her when no one else dared, she said slowly, her voice echoing across the chamber. You shielded her with nothing but your body, your voice, and bubbles. A ripple of laughter spread faintly through the hall before it was silenced by her gaze. The human shifted uncomfortably but nodded. I had nothing else, he admitted, but it was enough. The queen tilted her head, studying him as though peering into his soul. You knew nothing of her blood, her throne, her crown, she continued. Yet you stood as though she was yours to protect. Why? The human took a deep breath, his voice steady though quiet. Because no one should cry alone, he said softly. Not even a stranger, not even someone different. The princess's eyes shone brightly, her lips curving into a faint smile. The courtiers whispered, their voices buzzing like bees. Strange words for a human, one muttered. Dangerous words, but the queen raised her hand. and silence fell again. She leaned forward on her throne, her golden eyes fixed on him. From this day, she declared, her voice strong, sharp, impossible to ignore. This human is under my protection. Gasps filled the hall, courtiers recoiling in disbelief, guards stiffening in shock. The queen's tone grew firmer, every word striking like a hammer. He calmed a princess with nothing but kindness. He stood when all others knelt. He gave without knowing who she was. That is worth more than polished words and hollow loyalty. The courtiers dropped to their knees, murmuring their obedience, though their eyes still burned with doubt. The princess stepped closer to the human, her small hands gripping his sleeve again. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying through the chamber. He is my friend, she whispered, her cheeks glowing faintly. The human looked down at her, surprised by the word, but his chest warmed at it. Friend, a simple word but powerful enough to shake an empire. The queen's gaze softened for the first time. Just slightly. A bond has been formed, she said quietly, her eyes shifting between the two. Not of politics, not of blood, but of trust. The hall trembled with whispers, for such words from a queen were rare. The human bowed his head awkwardly, unsure what to say. I never meant to step into your world, he admitted softly. I only wanted to help. The queen rose slowly from her throne, her cloak flowing like liquid fire behind her. She stepped down the stairs, her presence towering even closer now. Her golden eyes locked on his, sharp but no longer cold. Then know this, she said firmly. Your simple act has changed more than one life. You may think it small, but kindness bends empires. The words echoed like thunder, the courtiers bowing even lower. The princess smiled brightly, her trembling gone. Her heart light for the first time in years. She clutched the bubble wand in her hand, holding it high like a treasure. It was no jewel, no weapon, no crown, yet it had brought her peace when nothing else had. The human stood tall, still uncertain, but he felt the truth of her words deep in his chest. For the first time, he was no longer invisible in this vast galaxy. The queen turned sharply, her cloak sweeping across the marble floor. From this day forward, she announced, let it be remembered, a human was the one who stood. When no one else dared, the chamber bowed low. The moment seared into history. The human glanced down at the princess, who was now smiling up at him with glowing eyes. She whispered softly, almost too quiet for anyone else to hear, you blew bubbles. But to me it felt like hope. His chest tightened at her words, his heart heavy but warm. And though he did not know what awaited him in the days to come, whether danger, honor, or exile, he knew one thing for certain. This bond, born from a simple act of kindness, would never be broken, and somewhere deep inside, even the queen knew the same. For though she was ruler of an empire, feared across the stars, on that day she had witnessed something far greater than power. She had witnessed the strength of humanity's heart.